Hello, my name is India and I'm a program manager in the Utah Office of Outdoor Recreation. Thank you for joining us for today's Summit Speaker Series and welcome to day 2 of the 2022 legislative session. We're going to learn today how a bill becomes a law and how you can be involved in the process. I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers for today. We have Rebecca Chavez-Houck on virtually, and we have Pitt Grewe here sharing a table with me. So I actually am going to turn the time over to each of them to kind of introduce themselves, their background with the legislative session and the legislative process. And I will start with you, Rebecca.
Thank you, India. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I know it's a busy time of year, especially for those of you that are monitoring what's happening on Utah's Capitol Hill. So thanks for taking some time, and I'm hoping that the tips that we'll provide today will be helpful to you as you wend your way through the session, and most importantly, subsequently to the session, because it's all about developing relationships with your legislators, and that's a year-round effort. You want to be continually doing that. Just by way of background, I started in getting involved in public policy just like you're doing today, which is I was an advocate on a variety of different issues that I cared about as a community member. So I started learning about how do I influence legislators? How do I get information to them? How do I show my perspective and how laws that they're implementing or that they're evaluating will affect my community and my family? And then eventually decided to run for public office myself. So my background is actually in nonprofit administration. So I've got 30 years of doing advocacy and media relations for nonprofit organizations. Before I was elected to serve in the Utah State Legislature, I served in the legislature from 2008 to 2018, served in minority leadership. So I was the whip for the House Democratic Caucus for a couple of years. So also I like to say that I was kind of a glorified den mother for a number of the other legislators, making sure they had what they needed. So background in nonprofits, background in advocacy, and then as a legislator on Utah's Capitol Hill. Since then, I've also continued to serve in the community as a volunteer, and was noted in my bio, my connection to outdoor recreation is as a national advisory board for HECHO, which is Hispanics Enjoying Camping, Hunting, and the Outdoors. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And Pitt.
Well, I just want to say welcome to everybody, and thank you for being here and taking the time today to learn a little bit more and see how we can help to move things forward in outdoor recreation here in the state of Utah. My background is a lot different than Rebecca's, and in the sense that I am pretty new to the public policy side of things, at least in a professional standpoint. Born and raised here in Utah, I grew up active in the outdoor recreation scene and working in the outdoor recreation industry. And as we all know, many people within the outdoor recreation industry are very passionate about our public policies how it applies to our public lands and our access and everything else that comes along with that. So getting involved in that a little bit while working in the industry. And then just about 2 years ago, I took this position here in the Office of Outdoor Recreation and was quickly thrown into a fast cycle of learning the process here and getting to know legislators and learning how things work and everything else. And last year's session was a whirlwind for me, learning a lot and getting experience there. And so here I am now in my second year in session, still learning, obviously, and working with lots of great partners and everything else to help be an advocate for outdoor recreation here in the state of Utah and educate and reach out to people to ensure they know, how important it is to their quality of life and how it can affect, your day-to-day life by some of these things that they get introduced and brought up in the session. And I'm happy to be here to help you get involved as well and help in these efforts to advocate for outdoor recreation.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I am going to very quickly put some links in the chat for anyone who's joining. And with that kind of as a list of resources that I'll be sure to send out after as well, I want to ask our speakers, describe how a bill becomes a law. And either of you can jump into this, and let's start with the more technical side of it.
Rebecca, you get to answer this first.
So really, if any of you have seen the Schoolhouse Rock, how I'm just a bill, just an ordinary bill, the premise behind that is very similar. That's a federal process, but it's very similar here in Utah too, in most legislatures, where an idea comes to a legislator, and oftentimes it's through constituents like yourselves. A number of the bills that I ran were ideas that constituents brought to me. Either they ran into a challenge with an agency or with a concern, or they had a really great idea because of a bill or a law that was in another state, or maybe they came from another state and we were doing things a little bit differently here. So ideas for bills come to legislators oftentimes from constituents. So if you have ideas, please share those with your state legislators. Anyway, so that's the way it starts, is somebody comes with an idea, or an agency like the Office of Outdoor Recreation might come to a legislator and say, we didn't need to make these changes. It's appropriate for that to make it easier for constituents to navigate regulations and rules and laws that govern public lands use and outdoor recreation. And then legislators will go to attorneys that are associated with the Legislative Office of Research and General Counsel, start drafting changes to the law. And then that's formulated into a bill. It's a draft bill. And then it wends its way through this process where it can start in either chamber. So you can go either to a senator or a representative and ask them to start a bill. And then they'll draft the bill. Then the bill needs to go to what's called the Rules Committee. There's a Rules Committee in each one of those chambers. The Rules Committee determines whether or not it's going to move forward and go to an appropriate committee for further vetting. The majority leadership, I will say, in both chambers has a lot of influence as to whether or not a bill comes out of rules and even makes its way through the process. Bills can often die in the Rules Committee and not go anywhere during a session. So it's very important for a legislator to have those conversations with legislative leadership for their constituents, to also influence and advocate on behalf of legislation. It'll go through the Rules Committee. It comes out of a Rules Committee, and then it's assigned to a standing committee, again, in either one of those chambers, wherever it started. So as a representative, it would have gone through the House committees. And then it's vetted there by all of the legislative members that sit on that committee. They decide whether it's going to pass or not. There's a lot of dialogue that occurs there. There's a lot of opportunity for you as advocates to influence whether a bill or not even makes it out of committee. You might want to come and testify and talk about how this bill might affect your industry or the things you care about. And then if it passes that committee, then it goes to the chamber floor. It's voted on there. And then the whole process starts again in the second chamber. So it can start either in the House or the Senate. And there's plenty of opportunities for it to die or to continue to move forward based on how well it's advocated for on behalf of by constituents like yourself. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think Rebecca explained that very well, the process of that. And so just to give a perspective from a state agency or a state office of how that affects us and our side of things, in that process, when an idea comes up and a legislator files or opens a bill file, which is basically putting in an idea saying, I want to run a bill on this topic. Usually then at that time, our favorite legislators, I should say, reach out to our office if it would affect our day-to-day office and say, hey, how would this affect you if I had this idea and I wanted to run it? Or, what do you think about this? How does it affect your existing programs or plans that you have or your strategy? And it may touch multiple agencies, right? And so they'd have to reach out to each of those agencies. So from the state side, we like to see that, and we can give good feedback. Again, we're not going to advocate either way, because if it's an idea that a constituent wants or things like that, we want to make sure it goes through the proper process of the legislature and everything that Rebecca mentioned. But we can help to guide and say, this is why it's beneficial for us, or this is where we think it could be beneficial, or where we could make some adjustments, or where we would make some suggestions. From then, once the bill is public, we get to look at it again in the fiscal, and if it affects our office, right, in the fiscal side of things. So the fiscal analyst will send it to us and say, all right, give a fiscal note on this and tell me what it's going to cost to implement this bill, right? If it's changing a position or if it's changing a program, how much would that cost to run? And we get to do that. So then that's attached to the bill before it goes to committee and everything else. So when legislators look at it, they know, all right, here's what the change would do, and this is what it would cost to do it, essentially. And so that's where the state's involved. And then from there, again, depending on the bill and things like that, the legislator or the committee, the standing committee that it's in, may call us and say, we're putting this before committee. Would you mind coming and answering some questions that in front of the committee on this day, right? And we get about a 24-hour to 48-hour notice on that usually. So hence, it's really hard to plan ski days during the legislative session for me. But you know, keep a suit in the car next to your skis, and you can put a suit on and go to the hill when you need to, and get back to skiing when you need to. But the reality is that, again, we have an opportunity to speak on how it would affect our day-to-day operations for good or for bad, and help the committee to understand that again. Because really, and I'll add this, and maybe this will come up a little bit later, legislators are dealing with all types of different topics, and they really rely on the agencies or interest groups or advocacy to be the subject matter experts to help them to understand the problem better and make the best decision based off of that problem, or that they're trying to solve, or a solution that they're trying to find. So if you are asked, or we are asked, it really is an honor for us to be able to give some feedback and exercise our expertise in recreation, or whatever it applies to whatever agency they're asking to give constructive, good support, feedback to the bill so that they can make the best decisions possible.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you.
India, if I could just add one more thing, a lot of folks don't realize that the legislature does policy, which are bills, laws that govern the things that we do, but they also have to pass a budget every year within that legislative session. They only have the 45 days to be able to do that. So there are other things that happen at the same time that bills are being considered and passed, and that is that the budget is being evaluated. And so there's two opportunities for you to weigh in. If there's an appropriation, for example, if an agency wants to add a new staff or a new program, they're going to more likely than not vet that through the appropriations process, which is a whole other committee process. But there's other opportunities that you can advocate for expenditures that are made on the agencies and the state's behalf within that process too.
Thank you so much. That's super important to note. And I'll kind of highlight a few things that both of you just said. First of all, it can be a lot of information, especially if you're new to the process. But le.utah.gov, it's one of the first links that's in the chat. It's the legislature's website. It can really kind of help break all of this down. You can watch the committees that were mentioned. You can watch floor time. You can participate virtually in committees, all kinds of things. So use le.utah.gov if you haven't before. Click through a few things, and really in my experience, it seems really daunting until you just jump into the process, and then it all kind of makes sense, which I know isn't always the most fun advice. And then to highlight another thing that both Rebecca and Pitt mentioned were committees and bills going through committees, and that is, again, just to highlight the part where you can really be involved and actually give public testimony and things like that as a member of the public on behalf of your organization, things like that. So that can be a great way to give some input, or just listen and hear what kind of concerns or things that are being raised.
And let me add, committees really, like India says, they really are the point where you can make comments, but they also are a really important decision-making point in this, because once a bill passes through a committee, if the committee is favorable, there's a very good chance that on the floor it will whiz right through, right? If the committee says, we like this bill, it's good. So watching a bill get to a committee and go through the committee really is probably one of the most key aspects of this from the public standpoint, or concerned citizens, to make sure, things, your input is heard, or you have an opportunity for input at that point. Because again, once the committee gives its thumbs up or approval on things, a lot of times, then it does great on the floor. Again, and then it has to switch chambers and do it all over again. So you have another chance in another committee, and once it switches chambers. But be aware of. That's a really key point to watch.
Yeah, thank you. And Rebecca, I know you've got some slides. I want to turn it over to you for just a moment to really kind of dive in a little bit more deeply to what we've been talking about. How does someone get involved? How does somebody work with their legislators? All of the above. And do you want me to pull up your slides? Is that easier? Oh, I'm sorry. I can't hear you.
It would be fantastic if you would do that, because I'm sometimes not very technically oriented. Thanks, India. I appreciate that.
Okay. I am getting them up.
So while India is doing that, I want you to think about an issue that you care about. It doesn't even need to be about the outdoors. It's just something that you care about. It can be education. It can be the outdoors. It can be public lands. It can be regulation and rules related to public lands management and use. And think about the expertise that you bring to the table. It might just be your own personal experience, your lived experience as you consider supporting something. Are we there, India?
Sorry, I'm using a pretty new computer. I'm going to forward them to Pat to get him to share those quickly.
Okay, that sounds good. So while she's doing that, I'm going to share some numbers with you. And I have a slide with those numbers, but if you have a piece of paper, you can also kind of just jot these numbers down. So the first number I'm going to give you is 112,000. 112,000. The second number I'm going to share with you is 43,000. The next number is 1,100. And the one after that is 500. Then consider the numbers 75 and 29. The next number is 45. And the last number is 1. What are all these numbers? So the first number that I gave you, the 112,000, that is how many constituents are in a Utah State Senate district. So of the 29 Senate members, they have to take into consideration that what their decisions that they make are impacting a constituency of 112,000. Of course, the whole state, but their concern is primarily with that 112,000. The 43,000 are the number of constituents that are in a House district. So those members of the Utah House of Representatives are thinking, I represent 43,000 people in my community and neighborhood, and I'm trying to make the best decisions based on their vested interest. The 1,100 is how many bills are open, bill files. Remember, Pitt just mentioned that that a bill file is opened whenever an idea is being vetted through the legislature. So 1,100 bills last year, bill files were opened. Now, they don't always make their way to becoming, even making it to rules. They may just be that idea that Crew mentioned, that Pitt just mentioned, that the 1,100. So, and then the 500, that's how many bills are passed, give or take. Usually somewhere between 500 or so are passed every year. So you've got 1,100 bill files, and then the attrition rate gets you to about 500 that actually make their way through the session. That 1,100, I like to bring it up because I want you to think about why those committee meetings are so important. And Pitt just mentioned that there's this, that they can either die or they can make their way through. And once they get to the floor, the debate may be really quick because the legislators are taking into consideration that bill made it through committee. And especially if it makes it through with a unanimous or a very high majority of people supporting it in committee, then they're going to say, oh, okay, well, my colleagues on that committee felt this was a good bill. I'm going to rely on that because I've got 1,100 bills to possibly consider in this chamber, or maybe half that amount. The 75 is how many House members there are. The 29 is how many Senate members there are in our Utah State Legislature. The 45 represents the days of the legislative session. So let's think about it. 1,100 bill files, maybe possibly 500 make their way through, plus that budget working that they're doing. They've got 45 days to get that all through and done. And the one is you. And you might think originally like, oh my gosh, how can I influence all this? I'm one out of that 112 or 43,000. But I know that, for instance, that India, who used to be my intern way back in the day when I was serving as whip, the most amazing intern, would get those emails from my constituents. And if there were personal emails, not the ones that are the templated one that I get 500 of, but the ones that are personalized, and they say, we need you to support this, or we're asking you not to support something. Sometimes it only took as few as 10 from constituents that would influence me. It's like, there's something here. There's something that's impacting my constituents, and maybe only 10 of them took the time to write to me, but this makes an impact to them. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. Thanks, Patrick. So this is why it's so important for you to develop a relationship and get to know who your representative and your state senator are. Learn about the bills that they may have sponsored, the committees that they sit on, their areas of policy interest, their profession, their community, or their other interests. Look at their personal websites. All of the legislators, I would be surprised if there are very few that don't have a personal website. And learn a little bit more about them. And as India just mentioned, do a bill search on the le.utah.gov website. See what other things they've sponsored, or do Google searches on news articles that feature them. Patrick, if you go to the next. So as I mentioned earlier, this is all about relationships. Reach out to them well before you need them. I know we're right now or at the beginning of the legislative session, so you might be thinking, oh, how am I supposed to do this? But after the session is over, reach out to your legislators and get to know them. Introduce yourself and let them know if you have a specialized interest or expertise, and tell them generally about your areas of concern. And I've used kind of a pretend quote here of, how to engage in a personal level. I notice your wife is an educator in Jordan School District. I am too. I teach at Eastmont's Middle School. This is a thing that I care about. I'm a neighbor. I live in your community. Go ahead and do the next one, Patrick. Reciprocity helps. That area of common interest or offer to help doesn't necessarily have to be on this topic that we're talking about today. You might be an attorney who has an expertise in contract law. You might have an expertise in a completely different area. So offer to help your legislator review bills or provide insight to them. I used to have a docket, or kind of what I would say a Rolodex of constituents that lived in my neighborhood. One was an expert in media law. One was a doctor. One was, somebody that was in a criminal justice. And if I had a bill that came up that I didn't have time really to vet carefully, I would send it to them and say, what do you think of this? Am I missing something? Is there something you would want me to know? And in having those conversations with those individuals, they knew that it was very reciprocal. They proved to me that they were trustworthy and helpful to me as a legislator. And maybe I didn't agree with them on all issues, but at least there was a development of a relationship and some reciprocity there, which is really helpful for both sides, for you as a constituent as well as that legislator. Go ahead and do the next one. And it's so important to do one-on-one visits. You may not be able to do that during the session, but consider doing that during the summer and the fall. And you can highlight one or two bills that you care about. Ask them if there's additional information that you can provide. And always, always, always follow up with a thank you email for their time. And again, if you do this during the fall and the summer and the spring, when we're not in the middle of the session and we're not being bombarded, or they're being bombarded by those 1,100 bill files and budget meetings and days that last 20 hours long, it sets the stage for, in the future, you being able to call on them to support an issue that you care about. Go ahead and go to the next one. And personalize your ask. I know that there'll be lots of opportunities when you're doing advocacy to send a form email. And as legislators, we track those and we put them in a file and we respond to you in a form letter. But if you tell me as a legislator very personal stories about how things impact you, or that, we had that great visit last year, this is something I care about, remember, this is what I do, this is what I bring to the table, and I'm asking you to consider supporting this. And even if you can't meet eye to eye and they don't agree with you, at least there's a concept for that relationship to be there, and they can put your experience, what you know, your expertise and who you are, to a name, to the person that they run into in the grocery store. It really does personalize it, and over time that will bear out. Next one, please. Another way that you can get involved and find out more about what they're working on is to attend legislative town halls. Most legislators do that either by themselves, or they might do it with a group of people. I mean, not people, but other legislators. So this was one that we used to do in the Avenues area, and we'd have all of the legislators that were in the catchment area for LDS Hospital. LDS Hospital used to sponsor these legislative updates on our behalf. And so these are some of my legislative colleagues, and our constituents would come, they'd ask us questions. We'd get a chance to talk about bills that we were running so that we could solicit support from them. Again, another opportunity to engage in a dialogue. Next, please. And then the last thing, more important than anything else, it's the golden rule. Remember to thank your legislator when they support an issue that you help them with, or that you care about. I would oftentimes get people that would email me and say, well, you always vote the way I want you to. You don't need to hear from me. Yes, we do. Yes, we do, as legislators, because it's, you may have a really bad day. You got your bill killed and you think everything is going upside down. And to hear from a constituent that just says, hey, thank you for doing a good job, or thank you for supporting us on this other issue. We really appreciate it. It can mean a lot. It is part of that cultivating a relationship with your legislators. And this photo is actually of thank you notes that I got from constituents over the years, and I've kept them. They've meant a lot to me. So that's just kind of setting the stage for continuing to be in conversation with your legislator. Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Thanks for bearing with the tech on that one, everyone, too. Rebecca, thanks so much. Those are a lot of really excellent points about everything from start to end with dealing with legislators, because at the end of the day, legislators are people, they are our neighbors, all of that. So that's actually it cues up my next question really well. I do want a lot of time for Q&A, so I've really got one question left for our two speakers, and the rest of it's going to be for Q&A. So feel free, anyone, start putting questions in the chat. But my last question really for the two of you, and Pitt, I'll turn it over to you for the first answer, is what are one or two recommendations to enjoy session? And this can be, and I'll give you a couple of examples. I always use an example of one of mine is to install, if you use Google Chrome, install the Utah Law Formatting extension. It makes reading bills so much more simple in my mind. So I love that extension. I love watching Hinckley Report or listening to the Hinckley Report podcast. I think it's fantastic. And you can see Rebecca on there from time to time. And then my other recommendation is just remember, it's very summing up what Rebecca said. Remember that everyone on the Hill is human. That's staff, that's interns, that's legislators, that's everyone, lobbyists. So just be nice. Just be nice to people.
Well, I would say everybody needs an India in their corner actually to enjoy session. That's my go-to, because she helps to keep everything straight and a good team, which I have the advantage of having such a great team to assist in a lot of these things and understand what's going on. But really, I think India hit it on the head in the sense that you've got to remember that your legislators are human, right? They're not, I think oftentimes in the media or, the shock value comes that these are, they're making decisions based off of a power struggle or whatever it is. And if you go into the session with that idea, you'll have a really hard time enjoying any of your conversations or processes or committees or anything like that. You got to remember that it's a process, that you are a part of that process, that you can speak up, you can educate. And if you approach it with a problem-solving attitude, not a finger-pointing attitude, but you approach any issue, whether it's outdoor recreation or education or whatever you're passionate about, if you approach it as being a part of the solution, as a problem solver, working with these individuals, just as you would approach the same as you'd approach an issue with your neighbor's dog in your fence, right? It never goes well if you just all of a sudden throw a fit and start yelling. But if you approach and say, how do we solve this problem, right? That's usually how a problem gets solved. You've got to have that same approach with the legislature, and you'll enjoy the process much more than if you're going at, pointing fingers and trying to pass blame or saying you're not doing it right or whatever it is that, that'll quickly burn you out during the session, because there's a lot of things that could be frustrating if you approach it that way. And so, that's my, I guess it's kind of my recommendation for life, but a little bit of empathy makes life a lot better in all, whether it's a session or your job or relationships, whatever, right? A little bit of empathy goes a long way, and that applies so much when we're watching laws be made and bills be discussed. So.
And I would just add, all of that is so true. And just remember that we do have a part-time legislature. There are some states where the legislature, that's their job. But our part-time legislators, they've got their job, they've got their profession or things that they've done, and they do on a daily basis. And then they do this as a side hustle, really busy side hustle that can really be quite consuming. So just know that. Unlike Congress, the legislators, we have interns, but usually just only during the legislative session. So we're doing our own work. We're answering our own emails. We're vetting ideas for bills, all of those kinds of things. And that's why I always encourage people to have those conversations during the spring, summer, and fall when they're not in session. And that way you can really kind of do a deep dive as to why you might want to support something or want to inform or educate them on an issue. And so it's important to be in conversation all during those times and just understand the context of what they're able to do and kind of all of the pressures that they might be dealing with. I noticed there's a couple of questions. Can we just go ahead and jump on those, India?
Yeah, that's perfect. And then we'll kind of, if we go back and forth between virtual questions, and then I'll open it up to the in-person audience. Let's go ahead and start with the first one in the chat.
Yep. Let me, I got to pull that one out there a little bit.
And
it's been moving along. Okay, here we go. Okay, this is because the one I want to reach on this one, directly out to legislators other than your own. If it's a topic, so for example, if there's an issue that's coming before their committee, yes, you can do that. I will say for the most part, legislators will prioritize emails and concerns of their constituents first and foremost. So just know that. And that's why it's also very important for you to develop a relationship with legislators, even if they're not your own, if you're a content expert. Because even if somebody wasn't my constituent, but I knew they were a content expert on something, I would turn to them and they could communicate with me. So yes, if you have a perspective or can really feed the dialogue and debate around something, feel free to reach out to legislators other than your own, especially if they're working on an appropriations request that you care about or a policy issue. And then about advocating, okay, and that similar type of thing, advocating on an issue where we aren't a constituent in the district. Yeah, it's just, it's important to still share that perspective, and they may not always respond to you, but their interns are tracking those emails. If it's a personal email and not something that's templated, I would really try to respond to every single one of my constituents that sent me an email. Even if it was just, thanks, got the message, appreciate your point. This is where I'm going to be voting on this issue. And that's also why it's great if you can to go to those town hall meetings or attend the town hall meetings, because if they're not responding to you and you show up at the town hall meeting, you say, hi, I've sent you a couple emails and just kind of wondered how you feel about this particular issue. That when they're kind of there in person or even in person virtually, that can make a difference. So that might be another way of doing that. And I would just keep reaching out because it is kind of overwhelming. We used to get hundreds of emails a day.
I'd like to turn it to the in-person audience, questions from anyone in the room. All right.
Let me give a plug. There was a question on Outdoor Rec Day on the Hill. It was answered there what it is. But for those of you not familiar with that, right, it's an opportunity for the industry and members of the outdoor recreation economy here in the state of Utah to come show their stuff, right? Whether it's you're an advocacy group or a business or whatever it is, to come and have an opportunity to catch legislators as they walk by, or come give them an opportunity to see your gear or your program, whatever it is. So yeah, details, we'll send out emails and details on that for anybody who wants to participate. You don't have to be a booth space. You can just come be a member of the public and hang out for the day. And I think it's a great way to show a little bit of unity and for the industry to show up and just say, hey, we support this. We're part of Utah and we want to be part of conversations moving forward. So if you have time and desire, it's a good place to get started. We have a question in here.
Okay.
What was that date again?
February 11th.
And for anyone who's not signed up for our newsletter, I'll make sure to put a link in the chat to do that, so you can get more information about that and things like this as well if this was forwarded to you, so you can stay in the loop that way.
I have an idea too, India, that I would want to share. Sometimes I would be contacted not by my constituent, but a friend of a constituent. So sometimes if you're trying to reach out to a legislator and you have someone who is a constituent of theirs, sometimes just having them act as that mode of introduction it can help because I trust my constituent, I have a relationship with them, and they'll say, hey, I've got this person that's working on this issue, they'd love to chat with you about it, can we come talk to you about it? So having someone go with you, that might be a constituent, is another way of dealing with it. And then Dr. Carter mentioned about advocating, reaching out to support low odds policy issues. There were times where I would be contacted during the summer on an issue that maybe it wasn't my forte, but I'm kind of a policy wonk. And they would say, hey, I just published this white paper, I just did this article on XYZ, and I thought it might be of interest to you since you serve on, government operations committee. Could we take some time and I can kind of go over the paper with you and my findings? Because it's data kind of driving the discussion of this is what my findings were. I did this really great research based on this problem that I identified, and I'd love to share it with you because I know that when I'm looking at some policy that you've passed in the past or bills that you've run in the past, you seem to have an interest in this particular topic. It's great new info, and I'd love to share it with you. So that's another way to kind of open the door to engage with legislators, is to bring them information that might help them with bills or ideas or policy directives that they care about too. So that's another idea.
That's excellent. Thank you. And we got another question about days on the Hill. And Rebecca, I think this will be excellent from your perspective as a legislator, former legislator. I've heard days on the Hill aren't effective, but would love to hear what your perspective is on that.
They are one tool in the toolbox. And that's why I put such an emphasis on developing a relationship with the legislator in advance and keeping that going. I think that days on the Hill are effective. It's kind of hard right now because of COVID, but back in the olden days when we could all get together and there were crowds of people waiting outside in the lobby and you didn't worry about viruses and stuff. But, I would still continue to participate where you feel comfortable doing that. I think they're very important because they complement the other discussions you might be having. So if you're in conversation with a legislator during the interim, which is the spring, summer, and fall, and then you show up on Day on the Hill day, they're making a connection. So I would oftentimes, if I was able to get off the floor, if I got a note from a constituent who was there on a Day on the Hill, who said, hi, I'm the person that you met last September and we were talking about this issue and I'm out here, then I would really try to go out there and say hi and visit with them for a minute. So it's part of a whole strategy of how to be in conversation with your legislator. Yeah, if you just show up on Day on the Hill and go and then disappear and then never hear from you again, it's less likely for it to be effective. But if you use it as part and parcel of other things that you're doing, that's what's important.
And let me add to that. The same thing goes from our perspective of it depends on what you're bringing to the table on the Day of the Hill, right? And so it is an opportunity for you to make a little bit of a splash. Obviously, you can't do anything too crazy within the rotunda of the Capitol, but word gets around of like, oh, have you checked out that cool thing that's, that booth out there or that table out there? Like, go talk to them. So in combination of, doing the legwork prior to and saying, basically you're showing up at the doorstep of the legislators, and if you've made a relationship or a contact before that said, if you'd like to meet in person, I'll be at your place of work tomorrow, or on this day. So come out and say hi. Makes it really easy for them to do that. And then while you're there, you know, if you have a table or some kind of presentation or something as part of it, you know, use your best marketing skills to make sure that it's attractive, to make sure that it's going to catch somebody's eye. And that's where it can be effective to then make new contacts or to start a relationship with a potential legislator that wasn't on your radar, right? You might meet somebody from Central or Southern Utah, maybe not in your district, but be able to start a relationship there, start to have conversations, and then go on from there. Again, as part of your larger strategy.
I would add to that about everybody has different learning styles. Like, I'm a visual learner. So if somebody hands me something that I can look at a pie chart and data and things like that, I love that. Explaining things to me, sometimes it goes over my head. Storytelling might be something that resonates with a legislator. Or if they're kinesthetic learners, they like to experience things, bring them on a field trip, invite them during the summer and the fall, come test out some of your equipment or do things with your group, because that will really reinforce for them what it is that you're doing and why what you're asking for connects to your constituency. So I say tackle it on all fronts. Send them the information so that's something they can look at, refer to, invite them on a field trip during the interim. And speaking about interim, so the interim period of the legislative year is oftentimes where ideas are vetted before the next legislative session. The legislature does meet once a month from May through November to look at bill ideas. And sometimes they will pass out what are called committee bills. They'll take a look at the ideas, the policy. They'll pass the bill during those interim committee meetings. And then those bills, once they go to the session the next year, they just fly right through. So keep an eye on what's happening during the interim. Take a look at those interim agenda items and use those as opportunities to engage with your legislator too.
Excellent, thank you. Another question just came in, and then I'll turn it back over to the in-person audience if you want to add any other questions. For both presenters, what do you personally look forward to the most when it comes to the legislative session? What's your favorite part and least favorite part?
I'll start with this. You know, I look forward to I look forward to the opportunity to engage with legislators. I know it's hard sometimes when they're extremely busy, and when I say engage, sometimes that is 30-second conversations or a minute phone call, even just a couple text messages. But you know, even those little things make a difference, and I look forward to the opportunity to engage in that way. I'd say my favorite part of the legislative session is kind of the, you know, I complained about this a little bit earlier that, you know, it's hard to plan a ski day, but I like it. Things are moving. Things, you know, it's exciting. Every day you wake up, you know, you can look at an update, and the bill that you thought was one thing one day could be totally morphing into something new the next day. And that's kind of exciting, sometimes scary, but exciting. It's a little bit of an adrenaline rush in some cases. And I'd say my least favorite part is sitting through a committee meeting where you're one agenda item, but there's 14 other agenda items in front of you, and you just have to sit there and listen to people discuss it until you get to the topic that you really care about. That can sometimes get long, especially when it's a contentious item that lasts for a long time, and all you want to do is, you know, talk about trail systems or something like that. So
I'm going to start with that one, just to kind of give people a warning that, you know, bear with the process. You may come up to testify, and then the time for the meeting gets over before your agenda item gets attended to. Be ready to jump in again. It is frustrating when that happens, when you take time work or you time off work to plug in and the agenda isn't clipping along as well as the legislators might want it to be, but they're trying to vet the other bills too as effectively as they possibly can. So that I would say that would be a downer for people that are coming. Oh boy, the thing that I love the most. There's so many things. I loved when student constituents would come up to the Hill. I did enjoy having constituents come up to the Hill and come out and talk to me about different things. The thank yous, to be honest with you, I know that sounds really but it is great to have constituents say thank you for doing what you can do. And then, least favorite part, just the long days, and when you work really, really hard and you're trying to represent a perspective and it gets killed. I mean, that's hard, and the long days, and probably my favorite part is the day after session is over.
Great perspectives. We got another question in the chat from an in-person attendee. Do you want to address whether written materials given to legislators regarding upcoming bills are effective or not effective? Written materials.
I'll go back to what I said earlier about it depends on how legislators absorb their information. I like written information because I'm a visual learner. I have to look and see what this says. Be brief. I love infographics. I find them effective, and I would often have what I called my advocacy binder on my desk, my floor desk, that was tabbed with those different pieces of information. So when the bill came up or the request came up, I could refer to it and say, oh, this is the reason why I'm supporting this, and I could use that piece of information in floor debate if I wanted to too. So I find them helpful.
Yeah, so in 2013 legislative session, before I came into this office, I did a one-pager on an office of outdoor recreation, and I created a one-pager for that and passed it out. I just wondered, I mean, it seemed to get great votes, just a few handfuls voted it down, but I wondered whether that was an effective thing to have passed out or not.
It depends. It depends on the recipient, but I like the info, but that was me.
Okay, good enough. And
Yeah. Do we have in person other questions? I don't want to skip over anybody.
Let me add one thing, and just reach out. I mentioned earlier kind of our role in the process, right? Not only do we support legislators in giving them information and feedback on potential bills and everything else, but that is also the role of our office to the public as well. Again, we're public servants, so if there's a bill that comes across your radar that you have questions about, like, reach out to us. That's why we're here, right? And we can say, this is what we know. We're very careful, obviously, in what we are strongly proponents for, or supporting versus or against or whatnot, because again, we are here to trust the process and let the public help to do this. Unless it's one of our bills that we worked with the legislature to run, then we're pretty much all in for that. But if you have a question about a bill, or you're wondering what bills may affect you, right? If you're concerned about bills in the ski world or the climbing world or the OHV world or whatever, right? You can reach out to our office and we'll give you our list and say, these are bills we're watching. And, you can then update your tracker on le.utah.gov or however you want to keep track of it and know and see who the sponsors are and everything else and do with it what suits your interest and your agenda. But again, we can be here as a resource to help you navigate through all that and find the bills, because 1,100 bills. I don't expect everybody on this call to start reading through all those bill files and start to flag them. That is not a good use of time. You should be outside instead of doing that more. So, but let us help and assist, because we are watching that. That is our job.
So in summary, Pitt just wants to ski for the 45 days.
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to kind of wrap it up. If you have any last minute questions that you really want to get in, go ahead and put them in the chat. But otherwise, I would just like to give a huge thank you to Pitt and Rebecca for everything all year long, of course. And Rebecca just put her email in the chat. Thank you for that. Like I said, I'll send out resources along with the recording. We do have it on YouTube. We'll get it up on YouTube. So if you have colleagues you want to send it to, feel free to share it with them that way as well. Other than that, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to stop the recording. And I'll stay on the call for just a minute more in case any questions pop up. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you.